Hi guys, it's part 2, so if you haven't seen the first part, this probably isn't going to make too much sense. Okay, CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, works very much on a surface level. It's very much about what your thoughts are and changing those thoughts. And so you'll have the sentence, the most common one, I am fat. You will then look at a number of different distortions that are causing you to think that you are fat. You will then look at these distortions and basically look at how realistic they are. You will look at evidence of the fact that you are fat. I wear a size whatever, I weigh this amount, people tell me I'm thin, etc, etc, and then at the end of it you take into account all of those realistic, rational measures, and then you look to how much you still believe that fact, and that's how it works in changing your thought process, basically. DBT is dialectical behavioural therapy, and dialectical behavioural therapy is a mixture of cognitive behavioural therapy and Zen philosophy, which comes from kind of Buddhist approaches, and it kind of mingles the both of those together. So it is looking at your thoughts and feelings, and it is looking at the present day, which is very much what cognitive behavioural therapy does. It looks at your present problems. It doesn't particularly focus on your past, and it looks very much at things like mindfulness, which is very much about being in the moment, understanding how you're feeling in the moment, expressing that. I also know that you can have therapists who are not necessarily clinical psychologists, but are therapists themselves, and they tend to work in things like addictions, eating disorders, a wide variety of things. I've had treatment from an eating disorder therapist who isn't a clinical psychologist, but who has worked and does work on an eating disorder unit and does see the patients through that. And so again, it tends to be under the recommendation of your psychiatrist. They tend to maybe assess whether you need to be under a clinical psychologist or another therapist. I think it very much depends on where you are at in terms of your own recovery, healing, therapy. To engage in cognitive behavioural therapy and things like that, you very much have to be quite present. You wouldn't be able to engage in such things if you were incredibly depressed, and very eating disorders. That's why they tend to wait until you get to a certain point to recommend those types of therapies. Seeing an eating disorder therapist, you can access them privately, and you can access them through websites such as Beat or the Eating Disorder Association website. They tend to be trained, especially in eating disorders, will have possibly a degree in psychology and experience working with people with these different problems. Again, you tend to find them within eating disorders and within addictions, and just because a person isn't qualified to a clinical psychologist level does not mean that they are not a decent therapist. It very much depends on your relationship with that therapist. The other type of therapy is psychotherapy. Psychotherapists are trained in a very different way to clinical psychologists. Their main area of interest is looking to the past, attachment issues in childhood, issues that have occurred in childhood that have affected the person's psychological welfare as an adult or as an adolescent. Again, this follows a whole different route of training, really, and it is in the psychoanalytic field, which means it sort of stems from the kind of work of Freud and Jung and that type of work. So it is very much more reflective. Cognitive therapies and such like that are very hands-on. They involve paperwork, they involve homework, they involve you actually being active in doing stuff. In psychotherapy, it's very much a talk therapy. It's very much the interaction between you and the therapist and what you can find, and again, they focus quite distinctly on the past. What else, really? Counsellors tend to have done maybe degrees in social work or even again in psychology, and again they've undergone different types of training. It's quite difficult to separate it all, really, but my experience of counselling has been that it is very kind of one way, that it isn't really challenging, it isn't particularly upfront. It's quite reflective. Again, it involves a lot of talking, and I have experienced counselling myself. I think for some people that's really, really helpful, but for me it wasn't, because I very much need respondents. I need somebody to bounce back off me. I need direction from the person that I'm seeing. So that didn't work too well for me. I don't know, the only other thing I can add into this really is perhaps a nutritionist who tends to work with as part of a team with your psychologist and all the rest of it, and who looks at your nutrition and ways of helping you break down rules, break down behaviours. So they can actually have quite a therapeutic role themselves, and I know a lot of people who have incredibly good relationships with their nutritionists and dietitians, and who are actually kind of therapists to them as well. Although psychiatry is very medical, a psychiatrist can play quite a therapeutic role in your treatment. This all depends on what their training has been. I've actually seen two psychiatrists, including my current psychiatrist, who is also trained as a psychotherapist. So both their outlook on how they treat people is very, very different. One of the psychiatrists I saw, who is a trained psychotherapist, does not actually like to use medication. So, you know, it really, really differs depending on what you're looking at. And, you know, my psychiatrist is my psychiatrist and my psychotherapist, so she prescribes my medication for me. She looks after my overall welfare. She makes recommendations to me. But I've chosen to have her as my therapist as well, and she was willing to take that role, which has worked incredibly well for us, because I have a lot of issues trusting people, and it allows me just to trust this one person. In terms of other therapies, music therapy is music therapy, drama therapy, art therapy. They are all trained in a specific way as well. I mean, there's degrees out there for people who can do stuff like that. So, you know, all their approaches are going to differ, and that's what I'd say about anybody who you're seeing. You know, all your approaches are going to differ, and what tends to happen in most circumstances is that there is a referral from your general practitioner, your doctor, who makes a recommendation of a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist assesses you, finds out what your needs are, your difficulties, your issues, sorts out your medication, makes recommendations for other treatment, and they all tend to work as a team. So you'll quite often have somebody with an eating disorder who has a psychiatrist, a therapist, a nutritionist. Occupational therapists tend to deal with day-to-day functioning, helping you do things as simple as get up and make yourself a cup of tea. They tend to work quite closely with people, especially in hospital, and tend to help people basically get a routine back together, able to make them able to work on a daily basis, to be able to get up, to shower, to dress, to go about things. Then you can have all different treatment in terms of assertiveness, which is to do with helping you stand up for yourself and basically assert yourself, learning to say no. You can have nutritional education. You can have a wide variety of things, and all of these things tend to work as an in-house thing based in a hospital. I know a lot of people who see therapists and such separately, and that's fine as well, but if you're going to sort of have effective treatment, my biggest advice is to work with a sort of unit of people. You know, if all you're seeing is a therapist, then make sure your therapist has contact with your GP, and if you're on medication, make sure your GP is in contact with your psychiatrist, and keep that connection there, because it tends to really help in terms of working. I hope that I've managed to answer some of the differences there, and let you know about some of the different therapies. And what I want to just do now is just really give you some recommendations of what's helped me. I'm just making this film. Go away, go away, go away, go away. What? I'm making a film. Something that has really helped me, can you hear my dad singing in the background, is being under my psychiatrist, who is also my psychotherapy. Psychotherapy has really, really helped me. It has allowed me to look at my past. It has allowed me to look at the attachments I formed as a child, the relationship I had with my family, my friends. It has allowed me to understand how that has then affected how I matured. I've looked at my gymnastics and how the impact that had, and then I've looked at the abuse and the trauma. Something that comes into psychotherapy in looking at past trauma is EDMR, which is to do with eye movement. I'm not going to go into that now, but that has been recommended, and that is supposed to be a very effective way of recovering memories when somebody is really struggling to do that. I found that by looking at my past, I've been able to put in perspective a lot of what has gone on for me. But what I initially did was a lot of CBT work. Even though gyro doesn't work that way, a lot of my work then was looking at, you know, my current behaviours and looking at how I can limit them, reduce them, and make myself safer, basically. And then when I was stable enough, I was able to, with medication, was able to then look at my past. Schema therapy is something that I highly recommend. There's some really great books on it, and it is worth having a read about, and that's something that's really helped me as well. Okay guys, I'm going to go because this is getting on, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, bye!